Good afternoon. So, a quick show of hands. Those of you who have finished college, what % of what you learned, what you took away from college, did you learn in a classroom? As opposed to late nights drinking, as opposed to everything else that constituted your college experience. How many people, was it over 75% of what you took away from college was in the classroom? How many was over 50%? How many would say over 25%? And then there's the rest of us. So what I want to speak about is the whole student. And this conference is about AI and learning, but a lot of learning doesn't happen formally. It happens in your life, and it happens all over your college experience and your K-12 experience. And the technical way to think about this is academic support, which is advisement and instructional tech, supporting the learning itself in the classroom, supporting faculty, and then student services, everything around the classes. So it's the things that are said here. So those things add up to a lot of money. And I just want to switch to a money kind of lens because it's relevant here. If you look at general U.S. universities, and from what I can make out, the numbers are very similar here in Korea, the cost of those academic support and student services are almost the same as the cost of actual learning, as the cost of teaching. And if you look at the most elite research universities in the U.S., it's the same thing. They spend more on instruction, but they also spend more on support. So these things are a significant part of the budget, and they're really necessary because they're a significant part of the experience. One of the things that binds the U.S. and Korea is that the suicide rates of college-age students has gone up by about half over the past 20 years. And that's not true globally. Overall in Asia and overall in Europe, the numbers are way down. So there's something going on here. Students are walking in needing more support than they did before, and governments are expecting more from schools as well. So there's a lot driving that increase. By the way, the increase 20 years ago, academic support and college and student services were about a third of the cost of instruction, and now they're the same. So they're high, but they're also growing very rapidly, and I think they're growing rapidly because the need is higher. So the question is, why haven't we fixed them? And there's a terrific book by Scott Bass at American University. We all agree on the goals of all those things to make students happier and more successful and do it less expensively. But the main blocker, and I'm going to come back to this as we start talking about AI, is professionalism. And I don't mean that necessarily in a positive way. Each one of those disciplines has become a profession with its own degrees, its own associations, its own conferences, which makes it very hard to find synergies among them, to have organizations that blend those things in ways that can add efficacy and lower cost. There's also regulatory issues, and there's also just the fact that if you're a college president, the thing you're probably not looking to do is pick a fight with your administration and go after, a small savings in cost or support systems. That there are other things here. There are a couple changes going on in higher ed that I also think are relevant to how AI is going to have impact or less impact. One, the first kind of movement of technology into higher ed were online programs. And so schools started having on-campus programs and online programs. In every part of society other than education, we moved past that into a much more blended approach. what I call an agile approach. The hardware store doesn't care if you buy the hammer online or if you go to the store to buy it. It doesn't care if you pick it up or it delivers it. Its systems are designed around one customer, what they need right now, how are we going to deliver it. The second change that's sort of coming, and I think it's happened more in the US than here, but it's coming very quickly here, of online learners, of students studying solely online in the US, 70% live within 50 miles of campus. So online education is incredibly local. And if you think about the Apple Store as something designed from scratch to fit into an online world, and they are the most successful stores in the world, how colleges and universities think of their campus as part of an instructional spectrum, bringing online students to campus, bringing campus students out to the outside world, doing so with the knowledge that their students are generally local, in part because of employment opportunities, in part because of just culture, is really important. And the third is the increasing need for lifelong learning. What you learn in college, what you learn in graduate school, is not going to get you through to retirement, and that's increasingly true. The overall market for lifelong education of people with degrees is 4 times larger than the graduate school market, and it's growing at 10 to 15% a year globally. So people are learning over a longer time, they're learning in kind of blended approaches, and they're learning, and they want to have a relationship, a physical relationship on a campus. So the question is how AI is part of the solution, how we're going to work around the whole student. So first, and this has been discussed a little bit, so I'm not going to push on it, but when you think about AI, it is the last part of a whole story about how you are ingesting data, provisioning it, who gets to see what data, normalizing it, right? The data from one university versus another, they call different things by different names, and we've got to pull it all together so that we can benchmark. And first creating just structured reports, dashboards, and then better reports that minimize the data that's nominal and focus you on the data that's anomalous. And finally, we move to natural language. One other thing that I should just note, as a metaphor that I'm going to come back to, is what's happened in the airline industry. After 9/11, when we started thinking harder about security, we moved to X-ray scanners that were anatomically explicit. And everybody was kind of freaked out. They did not want the TSA guy or the government person seeing them naked. And then they added a layer of AI so that all of the agents just see a cartoon image of a man or a woman with a square around the area of concern. There's something going on there, there's some metal or something, and you should look there. No one has a problem with that. We're still naked, but now we're just naked to the AI, and everybody's good with that, and not to another person. So, the first thing is, what you're going to see is universities moving away from dashboards, and I think you'll see this in industry as well. Dashboards were never very good. They force you to go someplace to look at specific data, and then they hide the data in a sea of other data. What you replace it with is just analytics. I'm a coach, and I get a tweet or I get a text from my AI saying, this student is having a problem, and you should contact them. So I've processed the data from a range of places. I've come out with an action item. When you click, I can give you all the detail why I'm telling you this, and that's actually a growing area of research in AI, of having the AI explain to you why it is recommending what it recommends or saying what it says. And this is the way to do counseling or to do support. But it's all pretty unimportant compared to what really is happening, which is serving students directly and making the load on administrators much lighter so that they can support students better and less expensively. Especially when students are off campus, they shouldn't need to go to the building. They may not need to talk to anybody. The first thing that blew my mind was learning about Wobot. How many of you know Wobot? Like nobody. Okay, here's this little company that has the stupidest idea I had ever heard, which is it's psychiatric counseling by an AI, replacing a psychiatrist. And I said, well, that's ridiculous. And they said, well, actually, it's already worth $1 billion. And it's being used really successfully, and it's now in FDA clinical trials to show that it is actually pretty effective. That Generation Z would rather do counseling and tell things to a bot than to talk with a human about those things. And of course, insurance companies love it because it's wildly less expensive. So think about the mental health counseling as something that already there is substantial kind of movement towards not just a blend of AI and humans, but in many cases just an AI. Financial aid. There are a growing number of startups that are answering a question that I think is really important, which is, why is it so difficult to figure out how much money you're going to pay for college? And it's much less of a problem here in Korea. In the US, it's an enormous problem. And the process is opaque, it's complex, and it takes forever. In 10 minutes, you should be able, it's all algorithm-based, you should be able to have a conversation with an AI who can then reach into your tax records as well and actually know what college is going to cost and put this to bed. And that's happening. Advisement, academic advisement. Which classes should you take? If you're thinking of switching a major, who's talking to you about that? The advisement itself, there are a growing number of companies that are doing that through an AI that understands what the courses are, that understands where your interests are, but also understands what your options are. And I think that's going to continue. And this is where I ended up. We think about general intelligence, we think about an AI that can help students, and that's not realistic in this case. Each one of these professions has to own its AI. And so exactly as the last speaker was saying, you need a team of AIs. Think about this as I'm your student support bot. And I know you, and I have access to all the data. But when I think you might have a problem with your course selection, I'm going to recommend you talk to my friend Bob, the advisement bot. And when I think you might have a financial aid problem, I'm going to put you over to Fred. And we're communicating and we're sharing a database, but actually think of them as different characters because really they are different professions programmed by different people, managed by different people who have to feel a sense of ownership to them. So the idea of AIs working together doesn't just have a technological aspect to it, it has a psychological aspect to it in terms of how you address different problems within a complex set of professions. And one thing I'll note is that AI sits with a whole team, what I call tier one support, that these people are generalists, they are responsible for students' lives, each one, some number of students, and can solve some problems themselves, the combination of an AI and a person. But then the individual professions, and this goes on for another 5 or 6 boxes, is first line of defense is the AI, second line of defense are the people behind it who are programming it and working with it. And under this structure, I think there's a lot of entrepreneurial activity happening in each one of those boxes. How those come together to actually support students better is, I think, probably a 3 to 4 year kind of ramp in. So, I believe that in a conference speaking about education, that the learning part, that the formal learning part is only a part of the whole student, that we have to look across everything, and B, that the solution to each one of those departments will be different and owned by that profession, but that a coordinated approach is actually the key to lowering the cost of higher education and improving its outcomes. This is not a simple thing to do, but I'm pretty excited about the work that's already being done, and by the need, not just in the US, the need here, the need everywhere, as we educate more people for longer periods of time in their lives, the need is profound to keep that part from driving the cost too high. Thank you.
When considering AI advancement, it seems that the field of education will undergo significant changes. In this context, what competencies or attitude do education professionals and learners need?
I think the starting point is I speak sometimes about the cost of education, which a conference like this rarely does. But the combination in higher ed and in K-12 of looking for better outcomes, but being thoughtful about the costs involved is really important. And I think what we should also be thoughtful about is the move towards self-serve. I remember one of the other kind of seminal moments for me in the early days of the internet was when you shipped a package through Federal Express, through FedEx, and you wanted to see where it was, you would actually call them, and then you would read them a 16-digit number, and then they would tell you when it was going to be delivered. And the moment that just moved online, that you could just cut and paste it in and just have it instantly without bothering anybody, was brilliant customer service, but it was also a multi-million-dollar savings for the company. How we think about ATMs, the original ATMs, you had to pay to see a teller because this was a cost savings device by Citibank. And now we actually pay more to use an ATM than to use a teller. We would much rather do it with the machine. That transition is going to be tricky in education, and the question is, what are the parts of it that we're willing to make that transition?
In the era of AI and lifelong learning, what competitive advantages do universities have as educational institutions? What educational implications are unique to universities that differentiate them from corporations or private educational institutions?
Number one, people trust higher ed. They trust it with their kids, they trust it with themselves. And number two, higher education largely has earned that trust, that this is where great research happens, it's where hard conversations happen. And while people keep saying, well, you know, it's too expensive and higher ed, they're so disconnected from the real world, actually, every economic metric of how do college graduates perform and how do graduate school graduates perform economically suggests that higher ed's doing a terrific job in preparing people for the workforce. Can it do a better job? Of course. But the data says it's doing pretty well, that it has earned that trust. The for-profit world, a little less so. And number two, access. All of the professionals who need lifelong learning are graduates of higher ed. So it has the research base, it has brilliant faculty, and it has actual access to and nexus to the learners themselves already. I think if higher ed works intelligently, it should own the lifelong learning space, and I think that's a really important a place, both societally and for the institutions themselves.
Okay. Oh, one more, please. Yeah. I believe that if AI can significantly reduce higher education costs, it would be a tremendous benefit for students. Schools that utilize such tools, particularly those with ample financial resources, may have own advantages. However, what efforts are needed for such opportunities to be utilized across society and eventually on a global scale?
I think it's happening in siloed ways that are relatively small, that people looking for large bore solutions to the student services and academic support space, to the support of higher ed, are going to be disappointed until they see little shoots of grass coming through the pavement in each department. And all that's needed is to sort of put them together with a support layer, with this conductor, to really show how much progress we're making. The siloed data problem is actually very large. The fact that universities right now don't see you as a whole student. The financial aid guy sees your credit rating and your financial history, and if you need financial aid. The people focused on discipline see something bad you've done, or allegedly. Everybody sees a little piece. And there are all sorts of regulations in place, both here and in the US, to keep them from seeing too much. The notion of an AI approach, the notion of a computer that has access to seeing you naked, and then can share just the pieces of the data that are appropriate, but making sure that that everybody's acting in concert, is incredibly powerful. And I think as schools start playing with it, we'll see some dramatic improvements in retention and in satisfaction.
Okay, we will wrap it up here. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
네, 큰 박수 부탁드립니다.